Tonight, de-escalation DUPE.
So far, we have not seen any de-escalation on the ground.
The U.S. and NATO skeptical of Russia's claims of pulling back forces from the border, even as all sides in the crisis over Ukraine agree to give diplomacy a chance. Plus, the staggering surge in prices for producers and consumers alike. And
there's men who are staying silent because they're hearing the dialogue and the culture saying it's her body, her choice.
A new survey shows men play a significant role in influencing a woman's choice. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. More mixed messaging from Moscow. Good evening in Washington, D.C. I'm Jenna Browder. Tonight, the U.S. is accusing Russia of adding, not removing troops at the border with Ukraine, contradicting Russia's own claims. U.S. officials pointing to a continued buildup along the border.
Unfortunately, there's a difference between Russia says and what it does. And what we're seeing is no meaningful pullback. On the contrary, we continue to see forces, especially forces that would be in the vanguard of any renewed aggression against Ukraine, continuing.
With 150,000 Russian troops still surrounding Ukraine, NATO leaders met today looking for paths towards peace. Russian President Vladimir Putin is demanding security guarantees from the West, including a pledge to never allow Ukraine join NATO. Now from Lviv, Ukraine, CBN News senior international correspondent George Thomas. George, we heard from Secretary of State right there. Are U.S. officials close to saying Moscow is outright lying about this troop withdrawal?
Yeah, I mean, you just have to look at history. Back in 2008, when Russian forces gathered their troops right on the border of Georgia, and there was all this international pressure from Western countries, from NATO, from Georgia itself. And then the Russians just said they pulled out, they withdrew their forces. Well, guess what? 8 days later, they launched an attack against Georgia. I mean, this is their MO. They do this. They did this in 2014, 8 years ago, when they said that these so-called green little men went into the eastern part of Ukraine, and Russia said, "Oh no, these guys are Russian. They're separatists from the Donbass and the Luhansk region, and that they're not part of our military apparatus." Well, 8 years later, it's the Russians that took over the eastern part of the country. So this is their MO, right? And the indications from NATO to Great Britain to our State Department and to the Ukrainians, they say they have not seen any satellite imagery to show that the Russians are indeed withdrawing.
Today, President Biden spoke with German Chancellor Scholz over the phone. Of course, yesterday, Scholz signaled a willingness to formally keep Ukraine out of NATO. The U.S. says, for its part, Ukraine can associate with anyone it likes. George, do the Ukrainians feel betrayed by Germany?
Well, I mean, they feel betrayed by the entire world. They feel like everybody is trying to tell them what they should do, how they should respond, how they should defend themselves, what they should say. In the meantime, Ukrainians say, hey, wait, what about us? Do we have a say-so? We clearly want to liberalize our economy, our freedom, and our way of thought, and we want to embrace the West. But the reality is that Russia realizes that NATO has expanded. There's no doubt. And that obviously is a threat and of concern to the Kremlin. I get that, right? So I get that, especially if you're dealing with an authoritarian regime. And incidentally, Putin, he makes reference to Saddam Hussein. He makes reference to Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. He makes reference to Afghanistan. He says, look, in all these places, look what happened when the United States, along with coalition partners, intervened. They, in essence, took out a sitting president. In the case of Saddam Hussein, he was killed. In the case of Muammar Gaddafi, he was killed as well. And Putin is probably thinking the same thing as well. So the reality is that the Kremlin has concern that NATO has expanded. It's got Estonia, Lithuania, Slovenia, Slovakia. The list of NATO countries are expanding. And obviously, Russia wants to make sure that a NATO country is not on its doorstep.
Ukraine says Russia is likely to blame for the cyber attacks that we saw targeting Ukraine's defense ministry, armed forces, and major banks yesterday. George, how big of a deal is this?
It is. In fact, those who've been monitoring this in the last 24 hours, they've come out, the Ukrainian government has come out and said this was the biggest cyber attack on the state banks, on the Ministry of Defense, as you mentioned, the armed services. They're still dealing with the fallout. My understanding is that they didn't do anything to cripple the systems within these various apparatus, but they gained access, and now the Ukrainian government is dealing with the fallout. They're slowly coming back. I mean, obviously, there's no run on banks and so forth. People are not panicking. The banks are working. But again, it just shows the various levels of, we're looking at a connected. Sometimes we think of we want to see a kinetic war where we see physical tanks and physical assaults. But the reality is that in today's day and age, cyber war is equally as dangerous and potent to those who are on the receiving end.
Yeah. Today, Press Secretary Jen Psaki said that the U.S. couldn't quite tie it to the attack to Russia at this point, but that these kind of things take time. So we'll wait to see.
Exactly.
The U.S. says it has intelligence that Russia could be planning to justify a potential Ukrainian invasion by staging a fake explosion video using crisis actors, fake Ukrainian military hardware, and actual corpses. George, what can you tell us about this?
I mean, I'm just laughing because the reality is that this is the truth. Guys, Russia has no justification to put 150,000 of their troops on the border of Ukraine. There is no justification. And so it has to come up with a justification. Putin has to sell this to the Russians, because otherwise, what are you going to say? I do think that one of the narratives that has popped up in the last 24 to 48 hours is this idea. In fact, Putin mentioned this during his press conference with the German chancellor yesterday. He said that there is a genocide taking place in the Donbass region. In fact, the Russian ambassador to the UK said the very same thing. In fact, the Duma is now starting the process of investigating a genocide in the Donbass region. Listen, I've been to Rwanda many times. There was a genocide in Rwanda. Over 1 million people were slaughtered at the hands of Tutsis. There was a genocide in Rwanda. There's a genocide taking place amongst Uyghur Muslims in the western part of China. And so I think we need to keep an eye on this narrative coming out of the Kremlin that, again, that there is a genocide taking place in the Donbass. Again, one of those reasons, looking for a justification to go in and do some kind of military assault.
All right, George Thomas in Lviv, Ukraine. Thank you so much, George. It's great to see you tonight.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, tonight, skyrocketing inflation breaking another economic marker. Producer prices surging at a whopping 9.7%. Today in a news conference, Republicans laying the blame squarely on excessive government spending.
Now, there are other issues. We've just gone through a pandemic, but we recovered from the pandemic. The economy is open. We do have some supply chain issues, but to think that supply chain issues in certain supply markets are causing this kind of a response is simply inaccurate.
The inflation blame game comes with the producer price index jumping 1% in just 1 month, up 8.3% from January of last year. And joining us now, Nathan Gonzalez, editor and publisher of Inside Elections. Nathan, welcome. The politics of inflation. So we saw the Trump administration pass trillions in spending for stimulus relief. Now, under the Biden administration, many more trillions spent. Prices are soaring in virtually every sector of the economy. Who gets the blame here?
I think ultimately Democrats are in charge and Democrats are going to get more of the blame. I mean, it almost doesn't matter when or how it started. The fact of the matter is that there's a Democratic president. Democrats are in control of Congress, and they're going to get more of the blame, even if they don't deserve as much blame as what they're getting. And politically, that's a problem heading into the midterm elections for Democrats, because there are a sizable, more than half of the voters believe that the country's headed in the wrong direction. And so they are primed to vote for change or primed to vote for Republican candidates because they are dissatisfied with how Democrats are handling the economy, how they're handling crime, how they're handling COVID. And so this is just one of the major issues facing Democrats in November.
Yeah, and we saw that poll out today from Morning Consult, Politico. President Biden, new approval low, 39%. Speaking of the midterms, for political watchers, they're already underway. Nathan, what are some of the big races that you're keeping an eye on?
Yeah, so happy 2022 elections for those who celebrate. Early voting has already started in Texas. The primary is on March 1, and there are primaries up and down the ballot, but I think a couple races to watch. In the 3rd congressional district, there's a Republican congressman named Van Taylor who is vulnerable in the primary, in large part because he voted in favor of the independent commission to vote to investigate January 6th. Now, this isn't someone who's like Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger, who have kind of gone out of their way to agitate former President Trump. It's this vote that is causing Taylor to be vulnerable, and we'll see how much of a problem that creates. Is he able to avoid a runoff by getting over 50%, or does he lose altogether? And that's a key race to watch. Then in South Texas, there's a 28th congressional district. There's a moderate Democratic congressman named Henry Cuellar. He faces a challenge from a more liberal challenger who's backed by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders. The two matched up last time, and it was only a 4-point race. And now she has more support, and also the FBI just raided the congressman's house. And so the bottom line, so there's a primary, but if the more liberal candidate wins the primary, that could allow Republicans an opportunity to win it in the general election.
Republicans are well positioned going into the midterms, historically speaking, but there's of course this big rift within the party. Over Donald Trump, over January 6th. Nathan, could that derail the midterms for Republicans?
Well, it could hurt Republicans if there are candidates in key races who are so polarizing or are so tied to the idea that the election was stolen that it turns off independent voters. But ultimately, I think Republicans are going to be in lockstep voting against Democratic candidates. Democrats are going to vote for Democrats. Then it's those voters and the independents in the middle. And if independent voters are focused on the economy and inflation and COVID, they're probably primed to vote for Republicans this time. But if they're focused on President Trump and they're focused on Republicans in fighting, then those independents might be willing to stay the course for another couple of years and stick with Democrats.
All right, Nathan Gonzalez of Inside Elections. It's always good to have you on. Great to see you. Thank you, Nathan.
Thanks, Jenna.
And coming up, new allegations. The 2016 Clinton campaign spied on then-candidate Trump. You're watching CBN's Faith Nation. Spying in the 2016 election, the special counsel tasked with investigating the investigators in the Trump-Russia probe, revealing the Clinton campaign's effort to dig up dirt on the former candidate and president. Special counsel John Durham's latest filings allege Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign went so far as to pay an internet company to breach protocols, not only at Trump Tower in New York, but also at the White House. And here with us now is Matt Schlapp, chairman of American Conservative Union. Matt, thank you for joining us. So these latest Durham revelations are getting a lot of attention from conservative media outlets. The legacy media, though, are largely ignoring it for the most part. Why do you think that is?
Well, he didn't come out with any indictments. What he has is this public explanation of the type of wrongdoing he's been able to discover. And the reason why we learned about this is because I think some of the subjects needed to change their legal counsel. So we got a little inside peek at what he's got. And look, the legacy media is saying there's no indictments. If he had anything, he would have indicted people. It's a good short-term strategy when you have no answer. When he comes up with his indictments, that answer won't suffice anymore.
Do you think we'll see the mainstream media, cover it when we do see those indictments?
At the next phase, I think it's fair. At the next phase, when he actually indicts people for wrongdoing, I think it gets impossible not to cover, because then people start going to court and the process starts. From what he described, it's the worst political scandal that I could ever recall in my lifetime.
Yeah, if Republicans, take control in these midterms, we'll probably see hearings as well. Next week, you kick off the 2022 annual CPAC conference. Are we going to see the former president there?
Absolutely. He'll be speaking at CPAC. So will Don Jr., his son. So will Ron DeSantis. So will Jim Jordan. So will Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley. It's going to be a great event.
Let's talk a little bit about, some of the GOP division that we're seeing. A lot of it stemming from former President Trump, the January 6th, election fraud, those kinds of things. Could the rift that we see within the party spoil what would otherwise likely be a very big year for Republicans in the midterms? How concerned are you?
No chance. It's not going to spoil this amazing victory that's about ready to happen. The reason for that is that independent voters and conservative Democrats, the few that are left, they hate all this woke stuff. They don't believe there are 62 genders. They don't believe that boys should be winning all the medals in girls' sports. They don't believe that America is a racist country that should have never come to be. They're just tired of all this wokeness. And that's why the Democrats are going to get slaughtered at the polls. And by the way, it's why people like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger will not be back in Congress. I mean, the only way Liz Cheney could come back in Congress is if every Democrat in Wyoming voted for her. And that's the kind of statement that makes the differences in the country very plain. So, yes, talking about the election in 1/6 could spoil the election, but only for a lot of Democrats.
And what we have with you here, we want to talk about your new book, The Desecrators, Defeating the Cancel Culture Mob and Reclaiming One Nation Under God. Tell us a little bit about this book. What made you decide to write it, Matt?
Well, my wife, Mercy, worked for President Trump in the White House and at his campaign, and I was certainly a surrogate for President Trump for all 4 years. And, we experienced this cancel culture, and it's a very painful thing to lose professional opportunities because you're a conservative or you're a Christian or you love America or you support Donald Trump. And the reason why we came up with this title, my co-author and I, The Desecrators, is because we think there's a spiritual component to this cancel culture that's going around. It seems like everything that's good or holy or transcendent is under attack. The church is under attack. The state of Israel is under attack. Anything that has to do with America's founding is under attack. These statues are being ripped down. And it can't just be a coincidence that everything that makes people happy and builds culture and is true is being attacked so vociferously. So we talk about the spiritual aspect of this battle that's raging.
All right. Matt Schlapp, congratulations on the new book, and thank you for coming on tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And when we come back, examining the father's role in a woman's choice to get an abortion, and how the church is moving to sway that decision. Welcome back. Well, the debate over abortion often focuses on one part of the equation, the mother-to-be. But a new survey shows that men in the relationship play a significant role in influencing that decision. Almost half say they encourage the abortion, and many men involved in the situation attend church. As Heather Sells explains, pro-life leaders want churches to open the door for couples to talk about unplanned pregnancies.
Men are not likely to be willing to share with someone else at church that they're going through that decision, or even after the fact that they have in the past made that decision.
And this new research backs that up. Almost half of those church-going men whose partners had an abortion admit that no one at their church knows about it.
Lifeway Research's Scott McConnell and Roland Warren, who leads pregnancy centers at CareNet, see a disconnect. Men attending church, claiming to uphold life, but not feeling free to talk when faced with an unplanned pregnancy.
Men do say that, the church certainly could be a place of support they don't necessarily view the church as the first place to go for support. And that's a real problem.
The messages that the church is sending is often very clear, just simply saying abortion is a sin, and not understanding that, there are couples facing some really difficult decisions. And yes, they got themselves into that situation, but they're going to need help at their point of need.
Last year, Lifeway surveyed 1,000 men who knew their partners were pregnant and then had an abortion. Half of them attend church once a month or more. Overall, the men pointed to finances as the main reason for their partner's abortion. They also cited relationship problems, feeling unprepared for fatherhood, or having enough kids already. 4 in 10 encouraged their partner to get the abortion, while 3 in 10 offered no advice.
There's men who are staying silent because they're hearing the dialogue and the culture saying it's her body, her choice.
Warren says churches must offer ways for couples, and especially men, to talk.
There really aren't on-ramps in the church typically for someone who's facing a pregnancy decision.
It's why CareNet is offering a new curriculum for small groups designed to spur conversation and come alongside couples who need support. In the end, it can all come down to 9 days, says Warren, between when a woman confirms a pregnancy and then schedules or has an abortion. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Still ahead, this snowboarding toddler's pep talk, guaranteed to melt your heart. Next. Finally tonight, a midweek motivational word brought to you by a preschooler in a snowsuit. 4-year-old Auburn Sage was snowboarding with her family when her dad decided to attach a microphone to her dinosaur snowsuit. Here she is.
I won't fall, maybe I will. That's okay, 'cause we all fall. Have fun, Dad. Woo.
She is cute. Well, the preschooler took on the slope with a lot of grace, with a few slips and falls along the way, calling herself a Stuckosaurus when one fall landed her in some pretty deep powder. There's a lot of powder there. But she never failed to get right back up again. Her message to all of us: have fun and remember that it is okay to fall. And that is a good word from Auburn. Good for her. Just a wise 4-year-old. That does it for Faith Nation tonight. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.